The autumn evening in Springfield carried a deceptive calm. Jamal Thompson adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, where he'd just pledged a substantial donation for a new pediatric wing. His designer motorcycle jacket and custom Ducati waited in the parking lot, a combination that usually turned heads, but not for the reasons he was about to experience. The streetlights cast long shadows across the asphalt as Jamal mounted his motorcycle. He'd spent the evening discussing property developments and charity initiatives, playing the role of the successful businessman he'd worked so hard to become. The evening had gone well. Several potential investors had shown interest in his latest downtown renovation project. Traffic was light as he cruised down Madison Avenue. In his rearview mirror, patrol car lights suddenly flared to life. Jamal checked his speedometer. He was precisely at the limit. He pulled over anyway, following the procedure he'd learned years ago. Clear stop, hands visible, no sudden movements. Two officers approached, flashlights aimed directly at his face. Despite the glare, Jamal noticed neither officer had their body cameras activated. "License and registration," the first officer demanded, without introducing himself or stating the reason for the stop. "Of course, officer," Jamal replied, maintaining his composed demeanor. "My registration is in the compartment under the seat. I'm going to reach for it slowly." The second officer's hand moved to his weapon. As Jamal produced his documentation, the first officer scoffed at his address in the affluent Oakwood Hills neighborhood. "This your bike?" The question carried an unmistakable undertone. "Yes, sir. I purchased it last year from Springfield Motorsports. You can call them to verify if needed." Jamal's voice remained steady, though his heart raced. Without warning, the second officer grabbed his arm. "Step off the bike. We've had reports of a stolen motorcycle matching this description." "That's impossible," Jamal protested. "I have all the paperwork. I'm the owner of Thompson Real Estate Development. You can Google me right now." The situation escalated in seconds. The first officer moved in, aggressive stance betraying his intentions. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Jamal stated firmly, but it didn't matter. The pepper spray came without warning, a burning mist that sent him reeling. His eyes felt like they were on fire, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to maintain his balance. Through the searing pain, Jamal heard the sound of his expensive motorcycle crashing to the ground. The officers forced him face down on the pavement, their knees pressing into his back. The rough asphalt scraped against his cheek as reality set in. His success, his status, his contributions to the community meant nothing in this moment. "You should know better than to talk back," one officer growled, tightening the handcuffs until they bit into Jamal's wrists. In that moment, as the pepper spray burned his eyes and the pavement dug into his skin, Jamal confronted a truth he'd tried to insulate himself from with wealth and success. No amount of money or social status could shield him from the systemic racism that had just transformed him from a respected businessman into a suspect in seconds. Maya Chen stood frozen behind a parked car, her documentary camera steady despite her trembling hands. Through the viewfinder, she captured every second of the assault unfolding before her. The expensive camera, a recent investment for her upcoming documentary about urban development, was now recording something far more urgent. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been filming exterior shots of downtown Springfield for her project. The neon signs and empty streets were supposed to be B-roll footage, but now she was documenting something that made her stomach turn. Her instinct told her to intervene, but her experience as a journalist reminded her that documentation could create more impact than immediate intervention. "Get that camera out of here," one of the officers shouted, finally noticing her presence. Maya didn't move. Instead, she zoomed in on their badge numbers, making sure to capture clear images of their faces. The officers' body cameras remained conspicuously dark. As the officers finally released Jamal, Maya observed his careful movements. Despite his obvious pain, he maintained a dignified composure that made the injustice even more stark. The officers departed with a warning, leaving Jamal to deal with his overturned motorcycle and injured pride. Maya approached cautiously, camera still recording. "I got everything," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "My name is Maya Chen. I'm a documentary filmmaker." She reached into her bag and pulled out a bottle of water and some tissues. Jamal accepted the water, using it to rinse his eyes. "Thank you," he managed, his voice hoarse from the pepper spray. "I'm Jamal Thompson." Even in crisis, he maintained the practiced introduction of a businessman. "Mr. Thompson, I know who you are," Maya replied, helping him steady his motorcycle. "Your company's renovations are actually what I was filming tonight. But this," she gestured to her camera, "this is something else entirely." Maya noticed how Jamal's expensive suit was now scraped and stained with road grime, how his confident posture had been temporarily shaken. She'd seen similar scenes before, but never involving someone of Jamal's social status. It added another layer to the story she knew was developing. "What are you planning to do with that footage?" Jamal asked, finally able to open his eyes fully, though they remained red and irritated. "That depends on you," Maya responded. "But I think you know as well as I do that this isn't an isolated incident. This could be the catalyst for real change in Springfield." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Your voice carries weight in this community. Combined with this footage." Jamal studied her for a moment, his business acumen visibly weighing the risks and potential outcomes. Maya could see the internal struggle, the successful businessman who preferred to work within the system versus the man who had just been forcibly reminded that the system itself was broken. "It's not that simple," he finally said, checking his motorcycle for damage. "I have investments, partnerships, relationships with city officials. This could destroy everything I've built." Maya nodded, understanding his hesitation. "Or it could build something more important. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from people who have the most to lose by telling them." The street remained quiet, except for the distant sound of sirens. Jamal wiped his face again, his designer handkerchief now stained with pepper spray and street grit. Maya waited patiently, her camera now lowered, but still recording. "Give me your card," he finally said. "I'll think about it." Maya noticed his hands were steady as he took her business card, the businessman in him already calculating next steps. As they parted ways, Maya knew she had captured more than just footage of police brutality. She had documented the exact moment when someone with power was forced to confront their own vulnerability to systemic racism. The question was whether this moment would remain personal or become something larger. The video footage played on Maya's editing screen, its raw intensity unchanged after dozens of viewings. In her small studio apartment, transformed into an editing suite, she carefully pieced together the narrative. The timestamp on the footage read 11:42 p.m., a detail that would soon become crucial to the story. Across town, in his Oakwood Hills mansion, Jamal sat in his home office, staring at his phone. Maya's business card lay on his desk, its edges worn from repeated handling. News notifications kept appearing on his screen. Local activist groups were already organizing protests after word of the incident spread through social media. The morning's Springfield Herald lay open on his desk. Local business leader alleges police misconduct. The article was buried on page 6, but its existence still made him uneasy. His phone buzzed again, another message from an investor, subtly hinting at concerns about negative publicity. Maya's phone call interrupted his contemplation. "You need to see this," she said without preamble. "I've been doing some digging. Those officers have a history. 3 similar incidents in the past year, all swept under the rug." An hour later, they met at Maya's apartment. The evidence she'd gathered covered one wall: photos, reports, social media posts. "The press conference is tomorrow," Jamal said, studying the timeline she'd created. "The police chief is going to make a statement. They're going to try to bury this," Maya replied, pulling up more footage. "But there's something else." She hesitated, then played a clip from her research. "This is from 6 months ago. Different incident, same officers, same location, right in front of your Heritage Square property." Jamal's expression tightened. The Heritage Square development was his largest project, a mixed-use complex that included several city offices, including a police substation. He leased the space to the city at below-market rates, part of his strategy to maintain good relationships with local government. "The press doesn't know yet," Maya continued. "But when they do, Jamal, you're not just a victim here, you're the police department's landlord." The realization hit him like physical blow. His carefully constructed world of business relationships and political neutrality was about to collapse. Years of working within the system, of playing by the rules while trying to change things gradually, seemed naive now. His phone buzzed again, the police chief's office. "Mr. Thompson, just calling to assure you that we're handling the situation. We hope we can count on your continued support and discretion." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. the next day. Local stations had picked up the story, and national news was starting to show interest. Maya's footage had leaked online, though not the full version. Social media was already alive with commentary and calls for action. In his car on the way home, Jamal passed a group of protesters gathering near City Hall. Their signs demanded justice, reform, accountability. He recognized faces from his own developments: tenants, employees, community members who had always seen him as part of the establishment. Back in his office, he pulled up the lease agreement for the police substation. Everything by the book, all perfectly legal. He'd thought he was being strategic, maintaining influence through business relationships. Now, it felt like complicity. Maya's final words from their meeting echoed in his mind. "You have to choose, Jamal. You can't be neutral anymore. Your silence now is as much a statement as speaking out." The press conference would force his hand. His position as both victim and landlord would become public knowledge. The careful balance he'd maintained between his identity as a successful black businessman and his role in the city's power structure was about to shatter. The press conference exploded into chaos the moment a reporter from the Springfield Tribune asked about the property ownership. Jamal stood at the podium, his prepared statement forgotten as cameras flashed and questions overlapped. The police chief's face had turned stone cold, betraying no emotion as his department's relationship with their landlord became public knowledge. Maya captured everything from the back of the room, her camera focused on the subtle shifts in power dynamics playing out before her. The moment crystallized when a young activist stood up, her voice cutting through the clamor. "Mr. Thompson, are you going to continue profiting from the same system that assaulted you?" The question hung in the air, transforming the press conference into something larger. Outside City Hall, a crowd had gathered, their numbers growing as news spread through social media. Signs appeared: "No justice, no lease," and "Landlords for Justice" among them. In the days that followed, Springfield's streets filled with an unprecedented mix of protesters. Maya's documentary expanded beyond its original scope as she recorded conversations between suited business owners and grassroots activists, all united by the revelation that economic power could be leveraged for social change. "We need to be strategic about this," Jamal addressed a packed community center. The room held an unlikely coalition: small business owners, community activists, religious leaders, and even some progressive property developers. "It's not just about one incident anymore. It's about using our collective influence to demand real reform." The movement gained momentum when other property owners began reviewing their relationships with city institutions. Maya's camera captured meetings where business leaders, many of whom had never engaged in activism, discussed using their leases as leverage for police accountability measures. Among the officers, tensions rose. Some supported the calls for reform, while others resisted what they saw as economic coercion. In the precinct, Officer David Martinez watched his colleagues divide into factions, his own certainties crumbling as he witnessed veteran officers dismiss legitimate grievances. The protests grew more organized. Maya documented how Jamal's business acumen transformed passionate but scattered demonstrations into structured campaigns. Protest schedules coordinated with lease renewal dates. Economic pressure points were identified and targeted. The movement spoke the language of both the streets and the boardrooms. "This isn't just about police reform anymore," Maya observed during a strategy session. "It's about how money and morality intersect in our city." Her camera captured Jamal's response, a quiet nod as he reviewed another petition from business owners ready to join the cause. Inside the police department, Officer Martinez began noting details he'd previously overlooked: which officers turned off body cameras, which calls went unrecorded, which complaints disappeared into administrative limbo. His reports to internal affairs grew more detailed, more frequent. The movement's influence spread beyond Springfield. Other cities began examining their own relationships between business interests and law enforcement. National news crews arrived, drawn by the unique intersection of economic power and social justice. Jamal found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. His business contacts now mixed with activist leaders in his office. Maya's presence became constant, her camera documenting the evolution of a businessman into a reluctant but effective agent of change. "You've started something bigger than yourself," Maya told him one evening, reviewing footage of another successful protest. "These people aren't just following a movement anymore. They're learning how to use the system's own tools against it." The police precinct break room fell silent when Officer David Martinez dropped his badge on Lieutenant Wilson's desk. "I'm not resigning," he stated clearly. "I'm requesting reassignment to community outreach, and I'm bringing formal complaints about what I've witnessed." Across town, Maya was filming a different kind of confrontation. Jamal stood in front of the city council, presenting documented evidence of discriminatory policing patterns in areas where he owned property. The council chambers were packed, with overflow crowds watching on screens outside. The connection between these two moments crystallized when David approached Maya after the council meeting. "I have documentation," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. 6 years of informal policies, unwritten rules, everything they don't put in the official manuals." Maya studied him carefully, her camera lowered but running. "Why now?" she asked, noting how his hands shook slightly as he handed her a flash drive. "Because I became a cop to protect people," David replied. "What happened to Mr. Thompson? That's not an isolated incident. It's policy disguised as procedure." The meeting that followed in Jamal's office was tense. David sat across from the man his colleagues had assaulted, while Maya's camera captured the unusual alliance forming. "They're already calling me a traitor at the precinct," David explained, "but they can't touch me without proving I'm leaking information." Jamal reviewed the files on the flash drive, his expression hardening. "This goes beyond individual officers," he noted. "This is systematic." The documents revealed how property values, racial demographics, and police patrol patterns intersected in ways that couldn't be coincidental. The alliance grew stronger when other officers, inspired by David's stand, began coming forward. Maya documented their testimonies. Veteran officers tired of the corruption, rookies unwilling to perpetuate the system, dispatch operators with recordings of biased response patterns. But the backlash was swift. David found his car vandalized, its tires slashed in the precinct parking lot. Anonymous threats appeared in his locker. His fellow officers treated him like a pariah, leaving him without backup on routine calls. Jamal faced his own pressures. Development permits mysteriously stalled. Building inspectors became unusually thorough. Long-standing business relationships cooled as former allies chose sides. Yet for every partner who stepped back, new allies emerged from unexpected quarters. "We need to protect our whistleblowers," Jamal announced at a strategy meeting. The conference room held an unlikely mix: former officers, business leaders, community activists, and legal experts. "We're not just fighting for reform anymore. We're fighting for the people brave enough to demand it." Maya's documentary expanded to capture these evolving alliances. Her footage showed David training community members about their rights during police encounters, while Jamal leveraged his business network to create legal defense funds for officers who spoke out. The movement's strength lay in its diversity. Property owners provided safe meeting spaces. Former officers taught security measures. Community activists organized protests. Each group brought unique skills and resources to the cause. "They never expected us to work together," David observed during a late-night strategy session. "That's their weakness. They're still treating this like separate battles instead of one unified front." The alliance faced its first major test when Internal Affairs launched an investigation into David's activities. The department claimed he had compromised ongoing investigations by sharing information. But they hadn't anticipated Jamal's response. "If Officer Martinez faces any retaliation," Jamal announced at a press conference, "every business owner in our coalition will review their contracts with city agencies. Every lease, every service agreement, every development deal will be scrutinized." The surveillance video surfaced on a Tuesday morning. It showed two officers beating a teenager behind the Heritage Square development, the same location where Jamal had been assaulted. Maya's phone started ringing at 4 a.m. as the footage went viral, spreading across social media platforms faster than the department could respond. Unlike Jamal's incident, this attack was captured from multiple angles by security cameras he had installed after his own encounter. The timestamp showed it happened just 3 days after he had testified to the city council. The message seemed clear, a direct challenge to his advocacy. "They're getting desperate," David explained during an emergency meeting in Jamal's office. "This isn't just brutality anymore. This is retaliation." He spread out internal memos showing how patrol patterns had intensified around all of Jamal's properties since he began speaking out. Springfield erupted. The morning commute ground to a halt as protesters blocked major intersections. Maya's camera captured the contrast. Suited business people joining hands with community activists, creating human chains across downtown streets. The police response was immediate and aggressive. Jamal watched from his office window as tear gas clouded the streets below. His phone buzzed constantly, business associates asking him to back down, activists requesting support, and journalists demanding statements. The mayor's office had already called twice, trying to arrange a private meeting. "They want to negotiate," Jamal told Maya as she filmed his response to the crisis. "They're offering expedited permits for my next development project if I'll help calm the situation." His laugh was bitter as he deleted the mayor's messages. The tension reached a new level when David revealed that officers were being instructed to target protesters who appeared to be business owners or professionals. "They're trying to break up the coalition," he explained. "They think if they can separate the suits from the streets, the movement will lose its power." Maya's footage captured the department's strategy backfiring. Images of arrested business leaders, still in their corporate attire, being roughly handled by police, went viral. Each incident brought more of Springfield's economic elite into the movement. The police union held its own press conference, attempting to paint David as a disgruntled officer and Jamal as a manipulative businessman using social justice for personal gain. But body camera footage from sympathetic officers kept surfacing, contradicting official narratives and exposing departmental lies. Jamal's response came through action rather than words. He announced the conversion of empty commercial space in his properties into free legal aid clinics for protesters. Corporate conference rooms transformed into organizing spaces. Security guards at his buildings were instructed to shelter protesters from police aggression. The city's response escalated. Building inspectors appeared at all of Jamal's properties, citing violations that had been ignored for years. Police presence around his developments intensified. Maya's cameras captured officers photographing everyone entering or leaving his buildings. David faced his own battles inside the department. His locker was vandalized with racial slurs. False complaints appeared in his file. Fellow officers openly discussed their hope that he would get what he deserves during a crisis call. The tension peaked when a suspicious fire broke out in one of Jamal's buildings, the same one housing the new legal aid clinic. Maya arrived with her camera as firefighters battled the blaze, capturing the moment Jamal arrived on scene. His face, illuminated by emergency lights, showed not fear, but determination. "They think this will make us back down," he told her camera, watching his investment burn. "They don't understand that they're just proving why we can't stop." Behind him, protesters and business owners worked together to salvage legal documents from the smoke-damaged offices. The confrontation began at dusk outside the police union headquarters. Maya's camera tracked the scene as Jamal approached the building, flanked by David and a group of civil rights attorneys. They carried boxes of documented evidence, every incident, every violation, every cover-up from the past 6 months. "We're filing formal complaints against 17 officers," Jamal announced to the waiting press, "and we're copying federal authorities on every document." The crowd that had gathered watched as union officials emerged, their faces masks of controlled anger. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. A squad car swerved onto the sidewalk, nearly hitting Maya as she filmed. Officers poured out of the union building, forming a line between Jamal's group and the entrance. Captain Reynolds, the union president, stepped forward with a smirk. "Mr. Thompson," Reynolds called out, loud enough for the cameras, "we have evidence linking you to fraudulent real estate deals. Step away from the building or face arrest." The threat was clear, but Jamal had anticipated this move. David stepped forward, his phone recording. "Interesting timing, Captain. Just like the building code violations that only appeared after Mr. Thompson spoke out." His former colleagues shifted uncomfortably as he continued. "Or should we discuss the union's investment properties?" The standoff intensified as more protesters arrived, drawn by social media alerts. Maya's camera captured the scene from multiple angles. The growing crowd, the nervous officers, Jamal's unwavering stance, and David's steady confrontation with his former superiors. "You're both dead men," Reynolds muttered, just loud enough for David's phone to catch. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." But his threat was interrupted by the arrival of FBI agents, their presence adding another layer to the confrontation. The crowd watched as Jamal calmly handed his evidence to the federal agents. "This isn't just about police brutality anymore," he addressed the gathered cameras. "This is about corruption, real estate fraud, and systemic abuse of power." Maya's documentary captured the moment everything shifted. As Jamal spoke, officers began breaking ranks, some stepping aside, others openly joining the protesters. The thin blue line was cracking under the weight of exposed truth. The confrontation reached its peak when Reynolds ordered arrests. But his officers hesitated, aware of the cameras, the federal presence, and the growing evidence against them. David's phone continued recording as more officers stepped away from the union leadership. "You can't buy loyalty forever," David called out to his former captain. "And you can't hide behind badges when the truth comes out." His words carried extra weight as another group of officers removed their badges, placing them at Jamal's feet. The night ended with no arrests, but plenty of revelations. Maya's footage showed union officials retreating into their building as more evidence emerged. Protesters celebrated peacefully, their numbers now including police officers who had chosen conscience over corruption. Later, reviewing the footage in Jamal's office, Maya captured a quiet moment between the unlikely allies. "They'll retaliate," David warned, his experience evident in his voice. "This isn't over." Jamal nodded, studying security camera feeds from his properties. "No," he agreed, "but for the first time, they're not the only ones with power." The feeds showed groups of former officers patrolling alongside community volunteers, protecting protesters from potential retaliation. Springfield's Central Park filled with an unprecedented crowd. Maya's camera panned across faces from every neighborhood, class, and profession in the city. The stage, set up against the backdrop of City Hall, stood empty except for a single microphone. Security teams, composed of both community volunteers and former officers, maintained a watchful perimeter. Jamal reviewed his speech backstage, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "The FBI confirmed what we already knew," he told Maya's camera. "The union's been running a real estate scheme through shell companies, targeting properties in minority neighborhoods for aggressive policing to drive down values." David burst into the preparation area, his face tense. "We've got problems. They're bringing in officers from other districts, riot gear, no identification numbers. And there are agitators in the crowd. I recognize some of them from internal affairs." The rally began, despite the threats. Maya positioned herself to capture both the stage and the crowd, her lens catching the moment Jamal stepped into view. The cheers were deafening, but she noticed the tactical units moving into position around the park's perimeter. "6 months ago," Jamal began, his voice steady, "I thought my success could protect me from systemic racism. I was wrong. But that night taught me something more important. We have power when we stand together." As he spoke, David coordinated with security teams through his earpiece. His training helped him spot the provocateurs moving through the crowd, but for everyone they intercepted, another appeared. The tension built like an approaching storm. "Today, we're not just demanding reform," Jamal continued. "We're demanding accountability. The federal investigation has exposed how law enforcement and real estate corruption work together to maintain systemic oppression. But we're fighting back with truth." Maya's camera caught the first sign of trouble. A smoke canister arcing through the air. Before it could land, former officers in the crowd intercepted it, using tactics they once employed against protesters to protect them instead. The crowd's discipline held. Instead of panicking, they linked arms, creating corridors for medical teams and security to move through. Business owners used their suit jackets as makeshift masks against the tear gas. Community activists guided families to safe zones. "They want us to react with violence," Jamal's voice rang out over the chaos. "They want to justify their brutality, but we're showing them a different kind of strength." The smoke cleared to reveal the crowd still standing, still peaceful, still united. David's security network proved crucial. His knowledge of police tactics helped identify and isolate provocateurs before they could cause serious disruption. Maya's camera captured these small victories: protesters protecting each other, former officers defending civilians, business leaders standing their ground alongside community activists. The rally's pivotal moment came when Captain Reynolds himself appeared at the edge of the crowd. "Thompson," he shouted, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "This ends now. We have warrants for your arrest." But as officers moved to execute the warrants, FBI agents emerged from the crowd. "Captain Reynolds," their lead agent announced, "we have warrants of our own." The crowd parted to witness the arrest of the union leadership, their corruption finally exposed. Maya's final shots captured the rally's true impact. Officers removing their riot gear, some even joining the protesters. David, standing beside Jamal on stage, removed his badge one last time, not in resignation, but in commitment to a new kind of justice. Maya's editing suite was covered in documents, photos, and transcripts. Her investigation had uncovered something far larger than police brutality. On her screens, property records revealed a pattern. Every neighborhood that experienced increased police presence showed corresponding drops in property values. "Look at this," she told Jamal and David, pulling up a complex network of shell companies. "The union's retirement fund has been buying properties through these facades right after aggressive policing campaigns. They're creating their own bargains." David studied the documents, his police training helping him connect the dots. "These patrol schedules," he pointed out, "they're not random. They're targeting specific blocks right before property assessments." His hands clenched as he recognized locations where he'd been ordered to maintain an aggressive presence. The evidence was damning. Police union officials had been manipulating property values through targeted harassment, then profiting from the artificial depreciation. Jamal's properties had become targets not just because of his protest, but because he refused to sell to their shell companies. "There's more," Maya said, pulling up surveillance footage. "Remember those building inspectors who suddenly found violations in your properties? They're on the union's payroll." The video showed late-night meetings between union officials and city employees, envelopes changing hands. The conspiracy's scope became clear as they dug deeper. Property records showed similar patterns in other cities. "It's not just Springfield," Jamal realized. "It's a blueprint they're selling to other departments." His own experience in real estate helped him trace the money through layers of corporations and offshore accounts. David's phone buzzed. Another warning from his contacts inside the department. "They know we're close," he said, showing them the message. "They're destroying records tonight, but they don't know about the backups." Years of working within the system had taught Jamal how to protect himself. Every document, every transaction, every meeting had been recorded. "I installed redundant security systems after the assault," he explained, accessing a secure server. "They thought I was just being paranoid." Maya's camera captured their race against time. As police units mobilized across the city, her footage showed Jamal and David copying files, securing evidence, and coordinating with FBI contacts. The conspiracy's scale meant federal involvement was inevitable. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior accountant at the union's bank recognized the patterns and reached out. "They've been laundering money through construction contracts," she explained via secure video call. "Every property they acquire gets renovated by the same companies. Those companies, they discovered, were owned by retired officers. The network extended into city government, with planning officials expediting permits for union-backed projects while delaying others. Maya's investigation revealed how the system perpetuated itself, creating wealth through systematic oppression. "This isn't just about real estate," Jamal concluded, reviewing the evidence. "They're engineering poverty, creating desperate sellers, then profiting from their desperation." His own success as a developer had made him a threat. He'd shown that ethical development was possible. David received another alert. "They're moving now," he warned, showing them police units converging on their location. "They'll try to seize everything as evidence in a fraud investigation." But Jamal was already ahead of them, initiating transfers to secure servers. Maya's camera captured the tension as they worked to secure the evidence. Through her lens, the true story emerged. Not just of police brutality or corruption, but of a system designed to maintain power through economic oppression. The culmination played out in City Hall's grand chamber, packed with press, officials, and community members. Maya's camera focused on Jamal as he approached the podium, carrying a hard drive that contained enough evidence to reshape Springfield's power structure. "Before I present this evidence," Jamal began, "I need to make a confession." The room fell silent. 10 years ago, when I started buying properties in Springfield, I was offered a choice: join their system or become its target. I chose what I thought was a middle path: silence. On On screens behind him, documents began to appear. Not just the recent conspiracy, but years of systematic corruption. Property records, police reports, zoning changes, all coordinated to maintain control over minority neighborhoods. His own name appeared in some of the earlier documents. I told myself I was working from the inside, he continued, his voice steady, building influence to create change gradually. But my silence made me complicit. It took becoming a victim myself to understand that there is no neutral ground in the face of systemic injustice. David stepped forward next, adding his own revelation. The department didn't just protect bad officers, he explained. They promoted them, created a system where speaking out meant career suicide. I watched it happen for years before finding the courage to act. But the real twist came when Maya set down her camera and walked to the podium. This isn't just a documentary anymore, she announced, pulling out her own files. While filming Jamal's story, I uncovered something bigger. The same pattern exists in 12 other cities. Springfield was the prototype. The evidence they presented revealed a national network. Police unions sharing strategies for manipulating property values. Real estate developers coordinating with law enforcement to target specific neighborhoods. A system designed to maintain economic segregation through selective policing. As they spoke, federal agents were moving across the city, executing warrants. Maya's footage showed the coordinated operation, corrupt officers being arrested, documents being seized, the machinery of oppression being dismantled in real time. But the final revelation came from an unexpected source. An investment group, representing some of the largest developers in the country, approached Jamal with an offer. They wanted to buy his properties, all of them, at well above market value. They think money is still the answer, Jamal told the assembled crowd. They think they can buy silence, maintain the system with new faces. He held up the offer letter. But what they don't understand is that this was never about property values. Instead of selling, Jamal announced a new initiative. His properties would be transferred to a community trust, managed jointly by residents and reformed police officers like David. Maya's camera captured the moment, a real estate magnate voluntarily surrendering his empire to serve justice. True change, he concluded, requires more than exposing corruption. It requires creating new systems, built on transparency and community control. The crowd rose in standing ovation, but Maya's camera caught something more subtle. The looks of recognition on faces of other developers in the room. The final scene of Maya's documentary showed Jamal, David, and a group of community leaders reviewing plans for the trust. The properties that had once been tools of oppression would become resources for community empowerment. Police reform would be linked directly to economic justice. Sometimes, Maya's voiceover concluded, the greatest acts of justice come not from exposing what's wrong, but from showing what's possible. Her camera panned across Springfield's skyline, where buildings once symbolizing power now stood as monuments to change. The story ended, not with a victory, but with a beginning. Jamal's phone kept ringing, calls from other cities facing similar struggles. David's example inspired other officers to speak out. Maya's documentary became a blueprint for communities fighting systemic corruption. Together, they had exposed more than a conspiracy. They had revealed the possibility of transformation, where economic power could serve justice rather than oppose it. Springfield's story became a catalyst, sparking similar movements across the country, proving that true change requires confronting not just individual acts of injustice, but the systems that enable them.